about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene.
That's all right, I don't mind a bit.
They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar
Flag
surface.
up now, you can see the stars and stripes.
Are you getting a TV picture now, Houston?
Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture. You're in our field of view now.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Liftoff.
In less than a century, America has progressed from the sandy hills of Kitty Hawk along the Atlantic coast into the vast new ocean of space. The journey's been difficult and dangerous, but it's also been rewarding. It's given us a better understanding of our home planet, our solar system, and the universe. Although humans have dreamed of sailing outward from the planet Earth for centuries, the realization of that vision began just 5 decades ago.
I had been working for NACA since 1945 as a young aeronautical engineer right out of college in airplane flight test. And we were not interested in space at that time. We were interested in high-speed aerodynamics. The X-15 was being built.
There's the drop. Before it returns to Earth again, the X-15 may fly some 60 miles straight up at nearly 4,000 miles per hour.
We were in Cold War that was darn close to hot war with the Russians. And there was great concern. Both sides had nuclear weapons.
You know, we grew up fearing the Russians. I can remember when I was in school going through drills where we got under our seats. So this idea of them beating us in space was a pretty awesome idea.
They were claiming superiority. Now, we didn't believe that, but they had been launching some rockets, and ours too often had been blowing up on the launch pad.
Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
And that was sort of the background to what happened then in 57 when they sent up Sputnik.
Here's a Russian satellite which is going over every 90 minutes, beeping. And it didn't take much imagination to know that that could have been a bomb.
I remember being very surprised that they had done this and that we had not been able to do it ahead of them. That was my main concern. I think that was the main concern of most Americans at that time.
Right then, I think we all inwardly resolved that that wasn't going to last. We were going to do something about it.
It was just a faint beep, a radio beacon, coming from a shiny little orb circling the Earth. In 1957, Sputnik signaled the beginning of the space age, and the United States was behind. Our first successful answer to Sputnik came with the launch of the Explorer 1 satellite, and within the year, the formation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
When I came up here in May of 1958, there was no Marshall Space Flight Center. Von Braun and his team were all part of what was called the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. And it was that agency, actually, that built and launched the first Explorer satellites.
Control panel check. Roger. Measuring panel check. Measuring panel check. 2 seconds. 2, 1.
enormous pride in that, because although it followed Sputnik, Explorer 1 had science instruments on it. And so it really marks the first use of space for scientific exploration.
I found my thrill.
It gave us the idea that we were surrounded by radiation belts that we knew nothing about.
On Blueberry Hill, when I found you.
So we were off and running as a result of Sputnik. And it resulted, of course, in the establishment of NASA by President Eisenhower in the summer of 1958.
We have one of the most challenging assignments that has ever been given to modern man. We will be developing and launching into space vehicles needed to obtain scientific data and to explore the solar system. We will be preparing for the day when manned flight goes into space.
Keith Glennon was really outstanding in that period of drawing together the thoughts of the people in the organization and seeking people from outside. Of course, I was a young punk at that time, in those early years, and I was a little hesitant about expressing myself, but the way he worked it, it got to a point where it was very common for everyone to really express how they felt.
We knew we could.
That we have produced more scientific knowledge with our smaller vehicles than the Russians have with their much larger ones.
We were trying to build satellites, trying to get things going, trying to catch up with the Russians and pass them by. And a lot of exciting things were going on in those early days.
An Air Force Thor Able 1 space probe under the management of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration achieved a near-perfect takeoff.
Guys like Max Faget and the Pilotless Aircraft Research Division, who had been designing these rockets over at Wallops, they had all been dreaming about manned in space. And I remember walking into Max Faget's office, and there on the wall he had a picture of a guy in a fetal position in a little capsule. I said, "What are you going to do with that, Max?" He said, "Well, we're going to launch a guy into space." And I said, "Well, you know that the G's are very, very high." He says, "Oh yeah, he'll black out, but he'll come to."
Would you like to swing on a star, carry moonbeams home in a jar?
We knew the Soviets were going to try and fly a man after they launched their first satellite, and the Soviets knew we were going to try to do the same thing.
The nation was getting ready to put a man in space. I mean, that was a commitment and that was the focus. We didn't know much about the space environment. You know, a young person like myself with no experience was on an equal par with everybody because no one had any experience, and it was exciting times, and any information you found was valuable, and people were interested in it and looked at it.
You could be swinging on a star.
But then when they opened this up for manned spaceflight and announced that program and won volunteers for it, I thought that was a natural with the background I had of test flying, and I met the criteria that they were shooting for.
Well, my hands shake and my knees are weak. I can't seem to stand on my own 2 feet. Who do you think of when you have such luck? I'm in love. I'm all shook up. I
was a test pilot, and the job of a test pilot is to fly new airplanes. Here, with the dawn of spaceflight, was an opportunity to fly an airplane of a sort that made an order of magnitude jump in height, altitude, and speed and distance.
And they were trying to convince us how neat it would be to get in a capsule on top of a rocket. And I said, no way. Send that idiot that goes out of the cannon in the circus and let him land in a net and forget us. They said, no, don't worry. We're going to put some monkeys and chimpanzees in first. Now I know I want out of here. So I really had a very negative opinion of it.
Before the first flight, we will have developed our Mercury spaceship to the point where it will be as reliable as man can devise. Today we are introducing to you and to the world these 7 men who have been selected to begin training for orbital space flight.
I feel that this is the future of not only this country but the world. We've gone about as far as we can on this globe, and we have to start looking around a bit. And it's just a natural expansion of flight.
Project Mercury is just one part of the endeavor toward space travel.
I got on this project because it'd probably be the nearest to heaven I'd ever get, and I wanted to make the most of it.
These, ladies and gentlemen, are the nation's Mercury astronauts.
Echo was 100 feet in diameter, and it was one of the biggest challenges that we had at Livestream.
This is President Eisenhower speaking. It is a great personal satisfaction to participate in this first experiment in communications involving the use of the satellite balloon known as Echo.
The real thing that came out of it was that everybody in the world saw it. They knew that the United States was in the space business.
Come fly with me, let's fly away.
Convincing others that humans could do a job in space, that's what we were up to in Project Mercury. 98% of the medical community in the United States did not think man could survive in that environment, much less do a job. And that was very important to the future of manned spaceflight because it allowed us to take advantage of the human being's thinking capacity, his intelligence, and it simplified the design of the spacecraft, frankly.
And none of us had ever seen a missile launch. And so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the booster launches, and the big flame, and we're standing there watching it go up like this. And here are these 7 budding astronauts watching this. It goes up and hits 27,000 feet and blew. And it just looked like an atomic bomb went off over our head up there. And I remember us looking at each other and saying, we got to talk to some engineers tomorrow morning. That was the initial launch that any of us had ever seen down at the Cape.
That Pilots Aircraft Division is actually the division that got us into space, because I work for Max Vauger, and Max Vauger, of course, is the one who did the Mercury capsule, invented that completely.
I'll tell you, it became immediately apparent to me that the only practical approach was the one I had proposed, simply because it provided the lightest way to do it. Our best launch vehicle was the Atlas. The Mercury was the only one that had a chance to be made light enough to be able to make orbit on the Atlas. We didn't call it Mercury that day. We still call it the capsule. The concept we came up with, well, it was it was a primate for Mercury. It was it wasn't quite there.
And then we started launching monkeys and then chimpanzees, and then they launched Yuri Gagarin. We were totally shook by that.
Yuri Gagarin and the Soviets got there first. And that was a terrible disappointment for the nation and for us, of course.
Yuri Gagarin was launched into Earth orbit in 1961. The United States still wasn't there. But the 60s were a decade of change, and NASA would forever change the course of human exploration.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
I thought that is the most audacious thing I have ever heard in my entire life. Are we serious about this?
Remember now, when he said that, we had yet to orbit the first man in this country. John Glenn was 10 months away from flying.
The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time.
Most of us thought he was really stretching the point, and frankly, I thought he was out of his mind.
We didn't really even have computers at the start of this. We were all still using our slide rules.
We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won.
He was asking us to do what most people at the time thought couldn't be done. But he was doing it in an environment in which the Soviet Union literally owned space. And he laid the gauntlet down. American people picked the gauntlet up and got to a point where they didn't know it couldn't be done.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
That was all heady stuff, and we were all, you know, go man, go.
So to go to orbital speed, you have to go 17,300 miles an hour. That's how fast you have to go to balance gravity. So the first manned flight for orbit was John Glenn.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
Doctors were concerned, for instance, that when you're in zero G for a while, for several hours, you're afraid your eyes might change shape, that you wouldn't be able to even keep your vision on the instrument panel.
Roger, zero G, and I feel fine.
So we were out to prove that those things did not make the difference, but and that's what that first flight was all about.
Oh, that view is tremendous.
I can see
When John flew, he saw these glowing particles at sunset, and they looked a little like fireflies, so he told the ground it was fireflies. And it was a major mystery, but I could create these fireflies by rapping on the side of the spacecraft. It turned out they were little chips of ice, and they fly past the window like a firefly might. My mission ended up being controversial because I overshot the landing by, I think, 200 miles. So my flight did contribute a lot of new knowledge to the science of spaceflight, and it took the form of redesign. But all flights do that. You know, we stand on the shoulders of those who go before us, whether or not they overshoot.
Pushing technology.
Stand by to white to the bird, and they can live early bird. White. And
Communication satellites, of course, came into being, and a lot of other neat things have happened as a result of that technology push.
The country was trying to build a supersonic transport, at least to do some research and build some prototypes. So by trying to study the flow fields about these vehicles, trying to compute the sonic booms and their propagation to the ground was a very interesting and challenging problem.
There was a lot of interest in Mars, largely because of the publicity which the planet received at the hands of Percival Lowell in the early 1900s. He reported that he saw canals.
the Martians plan to throw a dance for all the human race.
He made out a pretty good case that the planet must have intelligent life form. And so there was a lot of interest in Mariner 4 then because it was successfully flown past Mars.